Hello there, and welcome to the first Judaism lesson. Today we are going to be looking at Judaism Practices from the GCSE Religious Studies course. I've done this purely on the basis of a lot of you have asked for it, so hopefully this is something that is useful for you before those exams come up in a few weeks' time. So the key points that we're going to focus on today is we're going to look at these ones here. We're going to look at worship, how different types of Jewish people will worship, whether they are Orthodox or Reform. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between those as well, just make sure we are happy with them. We're going to look at Shabbat being their day of going to worship. We're going to look at then some of the festivals such as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur and Passover, as well as then we're going to look at some of their dietary laws as well and how they would go about ensuring that they do everything correctly. So to start off with then, we need to look at worship and prayer. Now, as I said, there is a difference here between Orthodox and Reformed Jews in the way that they will practice certain things. Now, in this instance, Orthodox Jews are those who follow the traditions exactly as they are told to in the Torah, whereas the Reformed Jews, they came around in the 1800s, and they were a little bit disheartened by the fact that people were treating them differently because they were Jewish. So what they decided to do was to remove the practices from their lives that make them stand out as obviously a Jewish person. So hence why they reformatted the religion. They got rid of the things that made them stand out so that they could blend in a little bit more within society. So the Orthodox Jews, when it comes to worship and prayer, they will go to the synagogue and men and women will sit separately. This way there's no distractions being had and everybody can just focus on God. Now, the services in Orthodox traditions will be held in Hebrew. That is because that is the original Jewish language, and therefore it's important they keep it as accurate and as close to the Torah and as the other holy books as possible. Now, during these services, they will often say prayers, readings from the Torah or from some of the other texts, such as the Tanakh, on the basis that they want to make sure that they are doing everything exactly as it says there. So by actually reading it in the service, they are ensuring that they follow it completely. Now, during this time, men will often wear a kippah, which is a small sort of round hat which sits just on the crown of their head, and it reminds them that God is constantly above them. Now, they'll also wear the tefillin, which are those sort of black boxes, one on the top of their head and one on their arm, showing that it just allows them to focus even more so on God, the fact that God is there in their mind and God is there with them by their side. Using those boxes just reminds them of that message. Whereas the Reformed Jewish people, they're going to do things slightly differently. As I said, they're going to do things that are going to make them stand out less. So in their services, men and women can mix together. Sometimes they might have services in Hebrew, but they might also have them in English as well, again showing how they are starting to transition to try and fit in a little bit more with the society that's around them. And the important thing is there's no dress that they have to wear. So the men don't have to wear the kippah or the tefillin. They don't have to wear these things that make them very obviously Jewish. They just need to turn up moderately dressed, but they can wear their own clothes. So jeans and a t-shirt would be absolutely fine. Now, this passage here from the book of Deuteronomy, this is actually what part of their prayer almost. It's a really important quotation to try and remember because it's part of their main prayer that they will say during their time at the synagogue. Now, if we were to have a question talking about two different ways of worshipping God, you could do this just by choosing two different actions. Now, the fact that they worship at the synagogue in itself is an action, because you can do it either at the synagogue or you can also worship at home. But it's important to note that actually in this answer, I've shown that men and women, they will sit separately. Now, that is a development of the point around the synagogue. In that second section, then, they wear the kippah. It reminds them of what it is. So I've given a keyword and definition. So if you want to see how this could get full marks, even though it's 3 sentences, here it is. That bit in red there is the point. The blue is then the development, that explanation. So they're going to do this where this is going to happen. So one thing is they go to the synagogue. What's going to happen there? Men and women are going to sit separately. What are they going to wear? They're going to wear the kippah. This reminds them of, so you've got that point, explain, okay? And that is going to allow you to maximize the marks that you can get if you were using an AQA exam board and using those sorts of 4-mark questions, you could answer that in literally 3 sentences. You could even convert that final point and explain into a whole sentence if you wished. Now, looking at the concept of Shabbat, or the Sabbath, this is somewhat Friday. It starts from sunset on Friday all the way until the sunset on Saturday. So for the main part of the actual day, Shabbat is celebrated on Saturday, however, does start sort of Friday evening going then into Saturday. And it's really, really important they follow the Shabbat on the basis that it's something that is commanded for them to do. Now, during Shabbat, they are not allowed to work. It means that anything that needs to be done on the Shabbat must be done beforehand. So what they will do is they will cook meals in advance. They won't go to work. They will clean the house. They will do all the main jobs that need doing so that on the day of Shabbat, they do not need to do anything at all. And this is because Shabbat should be focusing on God. So during this time, they will often go to the synagogue for prayers, because again, they want to focus on God. When they start it, they will light 2 candles, and this is something that they'll blow out at the end of Shabbat. And to end it, they will go and have the Havdalah, which is a special evening service at the synagogue. So they will go and do so again, all of this because it allows them to ensure that everything is focused on God. So the reason this is, it's said in the 10 Commandments. So in the book of Exodus, which is seen in the Bible, but also a big part of the Torah, this is when Moses receives the 10 Commandments from God on Mount Sinai. And one of those 10 Commandments is keep the Sabbath day holy. So if they do not do exactly as they need to on Shabbat, they're not following one of the most fundamental rules of Judaism. Which then brings us on to looking at some of the festivals that Jewish people will celebrate. The first of which is Rosh Hashanah, which is also known as the sort of the Jewish New Year. Now, it's a really important time because it allows you to reflect on everything that's happened throughout the year. Now, this isn't necessarily from December to January because this is based on the lunar calendar. So this is often celebrated in sort of September or October time. And when you are reflecting on your year, it's one of those moments where effectively God is going to write your name down in one of 3 books. The book in which you have been good or bad, or if you have been somewhere in between. Now, most people will be in that last book, that in-between book. However, if you have spent your year doing lots of charitable work and you've done lots of good things, you're more likely to end up in that good book. If you end up doing lots of bad things throughout the year, you'll end up in the bad book. Now, to start off Rosh Hashanah, they will blow the shofar, which is effectively a ram's horn, which they play almost like a trumpet. They'll blow into it to sort of signify that Rosh Hashanah has started. They go to the synagogue for prayers. Now, that's again, another important time, because when reflecting on all these things and making sure that you want to be in the good book that God will write your name down in, you want to make sure you're doing everything correctly and focusing on Him. So if you go to the synagogue, you're more likely to be seen as someone who has had a good year. Now, throughout the year, some people will do charity work. However, if they're aware they've had a bad year, they might decide to do extra charity work on Rosh Hashanah to try and help push them towards that good book. Now, they have a very special ceremony, which is where they basically cast out all their sins. So they go and declare basically everything that they've done wrong, and they cast them out and they say, I'm turning my life away from these things. And by doing so, it shows that they are willing to change and that they are more likely then to start living a good life, which is going to help their case in their name being written in the good book. Now, we know that the shofar has to be blown if you are an Orthodox Jew, on the basis that in the book of Psalms, it tells you to blow the trumpet at the new moon. So at the start of the new year, the new moon happens, that is when you need to blow the shofar. Okay? So it just demonstrates that there are actions here that they do which, to some people who aren't Jewish, feel like they're a little bit odd, like why would they need to do this? It's purely on the basis that they are instructed to do so. Yom Kippur, however, is more known as the Day of Atonement. Now, this is 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. And after that period of reflection during Rosh Hashanah, when they think about their year, It might be that they need to ask for forgiveness. So atonement is to basically ask for forgiveness in that sense of, if you broke down the word, you've got being made at one-ment. So if you're made at one with them, you are evening out the playing field, you are making things right again. So it's so important for them to ask for forgiveness on this day, because they believe that Yom Kippur, at some point in the future, is when God will actually pass that judgment onto the Jewish people. So if you have lived a good life, you'll be able to go to heaven. If you've lived a bad life, you won't be able to do so. You'll go to hell. Now, how do they celebrate this? One of the things they will do is they will fast for 25 hours. If you want to show commitment to the idea of your forgiveness and how sorry you are for everything that you've done in your life, it's hard to say that fasting for 25 hours straight isn't a good way to do that. You are getting rid of everything that you feel like you need, because this isn't about you. This is about making things right that you did. So by fasting for 25 hours, you're showing that you are committed to that cause. Now, often people will wear white on this day because of the fact that it shows purity. So if you wanted to have your sins forgiven and you wanted forgiveness from God, you would want to show that you are aiming to become a pure being. So that's why they will wear white. Now, again, similarly to Shabbat, they won't go to work, and also they won't use electricity. A lot of the times they won't do anything that allows them any level of enjoyment. And that's because if they're enjoying things and they're happy, they're not genuinely sorry then for the things they've done wrong. The fact that they don't bathe during this time, so they won't have a shower, they won't wash, they won't do anything like that, the fact they do that just shows that they are accepting of the fact that they are not a clean being, and that they need to become clean by receiving the forgiveness from God. Now, in the book of Leviticus, again we see this quotation, "For on this day shall atonement be made for you." So it states that Yom Kippur is that day of atonement, and therefore you must make sure that you are asking for forgiveness. And if you do so on this day, you will be forgiven, which just goes to show how important Yom Kippur can be for many Jewish people. Now, to end Yom Kippur, they will break that fast, usually with some sort of sweet cake, to ensure that then the year that comes forward is a very sweet year, a good year for them. And finally, the last festival that we need to look at is Pesach, also known as Passover. Now, Passover is celebrating the moment where the slaves, the Israelites, were freed from Egypt after the Pharaoh's reign. Now, God sent 10 plagues down during this time, of which the final one was the death of the firstborn child. Now, obviously God didn't want to kill the Israelite people, so they knew that what they needed to do was paint their door frames with lamb's blood. And by doing so, when death came down to claim the firstborn children, any houses that had that blood on their door frame, it would quite literally pass over them. Hence why we get that name Passover. The death passed over their houses to ensure at that moment then the Pharaoh would agree to let the slaves go, and that allowed their sort of exodus, their freedom from slavery. Now, during this time, they will celebrate this by having a very sort of special sort of ritual plate, platter that they will create. Now, one of the things they will eat is a matzah, which is quite literally an unrisen bread. Now, if we think about the time when these slaves were preparing to leave to go on this mass exodus, they wouldn't have had time to, make bread in the way that we would potentially recognize it today. So they didn't have time for the yeast to activate. So a lot of their bread would be very, very flat. So the matzah is something that is still eaten today to remember the fact these are people who rushed out of their homes to escape from slavery, to live a new free life. Now, that platter I was talking about is called a Seder plate. Now, on it, they will have lots of different items, such as the karpas, which is the green vegetables dipped in salt water. They'll have sort of bitter herbs in there. They will also have an egg, which isn't necessarily there to be eaten, as well as having lamb bone and some sort of a sweet paste. Now, all of these have individual meanings. My recommendation to you is, if you are not sure on those, BBC Bite Size actually has a great breakdown of each of those topics and each of those individual dishes and why it is that they are the way they are. So if you want to have a deeper look into those, feel free, have a look at BBC Bite Size, and it will give you all the information you need on that cedar plate. Now, during this time, wine is consumed. Now, this wine, in a similar way that we see in Christianity, they use the wine to represent Jesus's blood. In Judaism, wine is used to represent the blood that was painted on their door frames. Now, this was the thing that obviously got them their freedom. So they wanted to make sure that they wanted to remember that, because it was through that blood that it saved their ancestors, it saved their lives and allowed them to be free from the slavery that they were in. Now, again, why is Passover so important? Without it, the Israelites wouldn't exist. Therefore, the Jewish people would not exist. So it's seen as one of the most important festivals during Judaism, because of the fact that without that, they would never have escaped Egypt. They would all have died. There wouldn't have been any Jewish people coming on afterwards. We see again in that chapter from Exodus how important this is. It's because of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. We have to celebrate this because God is the one who sent the plagues. God is the one who told us to paint the lamb's blood. Therefore, we need to celebrate this and remember the fact that he helped us get out of that slavery. That's the thought process of Jewish people during that time. Which finally brings us on to looking at some of the dietary laws that exist. Now, we've looked at the festivals, we've looked at the worship, but we need to understand exactly how else they live their lives. Now, you'll see here is what is considered to be kosher and what isn't. So there are different animals that you can and can't eat. And this is either due to availability or the potential issues that those bits of meat might have in terms of causing you illness or anything like that. So foods that are considered kosher are animals that chew their own cud and have split hooves. So chewing their own cud, what that means is that when they digest something, usually animals that have multiple stomachs will regurgitate or throw up that food they've consumed once and re-chew it, making sure they get all the nutrients out of that food before digesting it a second time. So that would commonly be things like cows, sheep or goats. Those sorts of animals chew their own cud. Now, if it was birds, you would want to ensure that it was domesticated species, not scavenger or predatory birds. The reason you want domesticated species is because they actually, A, have meat on them and aren't going to be eating sort of rotting carcasses or dead animals or anything like that. So they're not going to give you any sort of parasites that could potentially make you very unwell. Similarly, you're going to want to ensure that all the fish that you eat have both fins and scales. Part of that is just to do with their level of intelligence. So, for example, dolphins, they are seen as highly intelligent beings and had great purpose in those days in terms of figuring out direction. So they wouldn't eat dolphins. And the problem then with shellfish is, although they are very easily caught, they go off extremely easily and can then make you very, very unwell. Similarly, in the not kosher list, the things with pigs especially, so the concept of pork, the reason that pork is seen as so bad is a similar sort of idea that it goes off really, really quickly. Now, they didn't have fridges and freezers when these laws were being written. That means that anyone who ate pork had a likelihood of getting food poisoning. Now, without modern intervention of medication, things like paracetamol and ibuprofen, food poisoning now doesn't seem like such a big deal, but back then it would kill people. So they wrote laws about things they can and can't eat, which foods were safe and which foods weren't safe. Now, you'll see down there at the bottom, you can't have meat and dairy together. So there's no cheeseburgers, no lasagna, none of that. Nothing that allows for meat and dairy to mix. Hence why also the back end of the cow can't be eaten. And that's because of where the dairy is produced within the cow. Sometimes it will seep out into the fibres of the meat, meaning the meat is now mixing dairy and meat. Now, one of the reasons they can't have meat and dairy together is because they have this quotation which says, you can't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, what this is actually referring to is an old tradition where you would boil effectively a baby goat in milk. And this idea then was a sort of a sacrifice of that animal and a way to prepare it. However, this was seen as something that was extremely cruel. So therefore, This quotation then expanded out to further sort of, you can't have meat and dairy together. So how do Jewish people ensure that they do everything correctly? Well, one of the things that they will do is ensure that they have completely different work surfaces for their meat and their dairy. They will have different sinks, different plates, different cutlery, different pots and pans, and in some households, even different fridges, where they will even store the food separately. This way, they can ensure that everything is free from the risk of cross-contamination. They're not going to have any issues of the meat and dairy coming into contact and therefore no longer making it kosher. In order to make food kosher, it has to be slaughtered in a very specific way where the animal is not caused pain or harm. And this is purely on the basis of life is given by God and therefore needs to be respected. Even if they are animals, they are still something that God created, and therefore you do not want them to suffer unnecessarily. Now, if I was part of the OCR exam board and I had a 3-mark question, this is a sort of answer that I would expect to write. In terms of making sure that they prepared their home to follow dietary laws, you would want to just explain some of the different things they do, such as having separate kitchen utensils, having different sort of sets for meat and for dairy, and then they avoid mixing them by using completely different sinks. They have different sinks, as I said here, and cooking areas for each. So they won't necessarily use everything in the same way. So their ovens, they might use certain hobs for the meat and certain hobs for the dairy, certain tray levels for the meat, certain tray levels for any dairy food. That way, they're not actually coming into contact with each other in any way, shape or form. But also, you'll have noticed on the previous slide, there was a whole load of symbols. If I move back slide very quickly, you'll see them here. All of these symbols on the right-hand side are what you would find on food packages, and that's what tells them that the food is actually kosher. So when they go to do their shopping, they will have to ensure that all the food they buy has those symbols on them if they are food that could potentially not be kosher. Things like vegetables and things like that are known as parve, which is just things that they don't have to fit into that rule. You can have any of them. If I was then answering a 12-mark question based on some of the Jewish festivals and how essential they are for preserving Jewish identity, here's an answer that I might use. Now, the first paragraph talks all about the different festivals such as Passover. I mentioned Yom Kippur in there, as well as Rosh Hashanah. Now, all of these festivals have huge amounts of importance. However, if I didn't include then a counter argument of what other things other than the festivals could we talk about, we could speak about the fact that you have to have Jewish values. You'd have to still ensure that you are observing particular things, such as the religious clothing that you wear, or even the concept of kosher. Now, this answer is something that you would want to edit. You would want to add on to it. At the moment, I would probably give this somewhere in the region of 7 to 9 marks. Although there is a conclusion there, I do not personally feel as if there is enough evaluation in there. So if you start to include some of your own evaluation into this answer, there would be no reason why you could not get up to 12 out of 12. It doesn't need to be a balanced argument. As you can see, the first paragraph is significantly longer than the second. Now, I have used some evaluative language, so I might even suggest this might get just about into the 10 marks, but it certainly needs a lot more. A really simple way of doing so is at the end of each paragraph, just saying this is a strong argument because, this is a weak argument because. By doing so, you are clearly showing the exam marker that you are using that evaluation, and that is what is going to get you into that top band. I hope this lesson has been useful. There is more to come on Judaism. There is going to be a webinar on Friday, the 9th of May, which if you're able to come along to, brilliant. We're going to be looking at Judaism sort of beliefs and teachings. However, if you can't get to that session, do feel free to watch the re-recorded version of it, as well as any future lessons that come up on Judaism. Thank you very much, guys, and I will see you in the next one.